"Honey, you okay?" Grace asked, her hand gently resting on my shoulder as I sank deeper into the couch. It was early evening. The low hum of the television filled the room. I had just walked in from a long day at work, barely managing to kick off my shoes before collapsing on the sofa. "Yeah, I'm fine, just tired. That meeting was brutal," I said, rubbing my temples as the dull headache from the day started to intensify. I've been staring at spreadsheets and graphs for hours, dealing with endless questions from my team. Grace knew the look. She'd seen it plenty of times over the years. She sat down next to me, her fingers absent-mindedly playing with the fabric of her dress. "Well, maybe you should come out tonight. A party at the club might be exactly what you need to relax," she suggested. "Alice and I are planning to go. You know, it's been forever since we all had some fun." She smiled, her tone light and persuasive. I glanced at her, noting how excited she seemed. Grace loved these kinds of gatherings, mingling, dancing, sipping cocktails. Well, I never really enjoyed them as much as she did. "I don't know," I started, leaning back and closing my eyes. The idea of loud music and small talk only added to my headache. "I'm beat. You two go, just don't stay out too late." As if on cue, Alice walked in, adjusting her dress and flashing her usual radiant grin. At 28, she was always looking for excitement. "Come on, Dad. You can't bail on us," she teased, her heels clicking on the floor as she crossed the room. She planted a quick kiss on my cheek before giving her reflection one last check in the mirror by the door. "The club's going to be packed tonight. You'll miss all the fun." I smiled at her enthusiasm. Alice always knew how to light up a room, but tonight I just couldn't muster the energy. "I'll pass," I said, chuckling softly. "You and your mom have enough fun for me," I added. "All right, suit yourself," Alice said, laughing as she grabbed her purse from the counter. "But if you change your mind, you know where we'll be." Grace stood up, smoothing her dress before leaning over and giving me a quick kiss. "You sure you don't want to come?" she asked again, her voice soft. There was a hint of disappointment, but it was wrapped in the same affection I had known for years. Positive I needed a quiet night, I reassured her. She gave me a playful smile and nodded. "Okay. But don't say I didn't warn you about missing the best party of the year." With that, they both headed toward the door, their laughter trailing behind them. The door clicked shut, and the house fell into an immediate stillness. I glanced at the clock. It wasn't even 8 o'clock yet, but the silence already felt too loud. I sat there for a few moments, the dim light of the room casting long shadows across the floor. Normally, the peace and quiet would have been a relief, but tonight it felt different. Something tugged at the back of my mind, a strange unease that I couldn't shake. "Maybe it's just the headache," I muttered to myself, standing up and walking into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. As I sipped, I tried to push the uneasiness away, reminding myself that everything was fine. I had no reason to be worried. Grace and Alice loved these club events. They had been attending them for years, ever since Alice had moved back home after college. The club was like a second home for us: barbecues, holiday parties, summer picnics. I had always trusted that they were safe, having fun with friends. But tonight, something felt off. I walked back to the couch, staring at the empty space where Grace had been sitting just minutes before. She had looked beautiful as always, still full of life, still vibrant after all these years. And Alice, too, my little girl, all grown up but still the same playful spirit. They were my world, and I trusted them completely. But why, then, did I feel so uneasy? The thought nagged at me as I flicked through the channels on TV, not really watching anything. Maybe it was just my exhaustion catching up with me, or maybe it was the way Grace had insisted I come tonight. She'd seemed unusually eager. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. "You're just being paranoid," I told myself. There was no reason to worry. Grace had always been loyal, and Alice, well, she had her wild side, but she was a good kid at heart. Still, as the minutes ticked by, and the quiet of the house settled in, that feeling nodded at me. I found myself glancing at the clock again. Only 8:30. They probably just arrived at the club, settling in with drinks and catching up with friends. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine them there. Grace laughing with her friends, Alice surrounded by a group of younger people, her contagious energy filling the room. They were just having a good time, that's all it was. But as much as I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the unease. I stared at the ceiling, the fan above me spinning lazily. I should have gone. I should have pushed through the exhaustion and joined them. What's wrong with me tonight? I muttered, running a hand through my hair. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe I was just overthinking things because I wasn't feeling well. As the hours passed, I tried distracting myself with the movie, but the quiet moment kept dragging me back to that feeling, that small, persistent knot in my gut that something was off. By the time 10 o'clock rolled around, I gave up on the TV and went to bed. The unease still hung in the air like a storm cloud about to break. Grace and Alice would be home soon. Everything would be fine, just like always. But in the back of my mind, that quiet voice whispered again. Something was wrong. I just didn't know it yet. The next morning started off just like any other. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, trying to clear my inbox of work emails. The light streamed through the window, warming the room as I absently scrolled through messages, half reading reports that had come in overnight. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and for a brief moment, the peacefulness of the morning calmed my lingering headache from the previous day. The doorbell rang, interrupting my focus. I glanced at the clock. It was still early, barely 8 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. Setting down my coffee, I stood up and made my way to the front door. Through the peephole I saw Rob, our new neighbor. He had moved in a few days ago, a big guy with a friendly demeanor, but today something seemed off. His posture was stiff, and his expression serious. I opened the door. "Hey, Rob, what's going on?" I asked, trying to sound casual despite his odd appearance. "Hey man, got a minute?" Rob's voice was tense, his usual easygoing smile absent. Sure. Come on in," I said, stepping aside to let him enter. I could feel the weight of whatever he had to say, like a storm cloud hanging over him. Rob walked into the kitchen, his eyes scanning the room quickly. He seemed cautious, like he was about to drop something heavy on me and wanted to make sure no one else was around. "You okay?" I asked, frowning at his strange behavior. He was usually so relaxed, the kind of guy who'd crack a joke or share a funny story, but today he looked uncomfortable. Rob glanced at me, his hand fidgeting with his phone. "Look, man, I don't want to bring this up, but I feel like you need to know," he said. A knot began to form in my stomach. I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms. "What are you talking about? You left the party early last night, right?" Rob asked, not making eye contact. I nodded. "No, I wasn't feeling great, so I stayed home and crashed." "Why?" Rob let out a low whistle, shaking his head as if he didn't quite know how to say what he had to say. "Man, you missed one hell of a party. Things got wild. The club manager had 2 chicks in the hot tub, and he was treating them with his Johnson. It was insane. Check this out." I felt a flicker of unease. Rob wasn't one to exaggerate, and something about his tone made my heart race. "What do you mean? What happened?" I asked, my voice tense now matching his. He hesitated for a moment, then pulled out his phone. "I wasn't going to show you this, but I think you need to see it." My stomach tightened as Rob unlocked his phone, his fingers moving slowly, like he was reluctant to open the file. I watched him, my mind racing, trying to guess what could possibly be on that screen. When he turned the phone toward me, the image on the screen sent a chill down my spine. At first, I didn't register what I was seeing. It was a video, fuzzy at first, then coming into focus. There was the hot tub at the club, familiar and yet suddenly foreign. I saw 2 women in micro bikinis, laughing and splashing in the water, their faces partially obscured by the steam. Then it hit me. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized them. Grace and Alice, my wife and my daughter. They were in the hot tub, laughing and flirting with the club manager. My vision blurred, and the room seemed to spin around me. The club manager's hand rested casually on Grace's shoulder, and then he leaned in, far too close. My heart pounded as I watched in horror. They were laughing, touching, and then it became something much worse. "No, no way," I whispered. My mouth was dry. I could barely speak, barely breathe. Rob stood there silently, watching me, his face a mask of sympathy. "I'm sorry, man. I didn't want to be the one to show you this, but you had to see it." I stared at the phone, unable to look away from the nightmare unfolding in front of me. Grace's laughter rang in my ears, distorted now, tainted by betrayal. Alice was right there beside her, the two of them behaving like strangers. I felt a wave of nausea rise up and I clenched my fists, trying to keep it together. My wife, my daughter, with him. How could that be? I muttered, my voice barely audible. My mind was racing, replaying the scenes over and over, looking for some explanation that could make sense of what I was seeing. But there was none. Rob cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly from one foot to the other. "I'm really sorry, man. I thought you should know." I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to smash something, anything, to release the anger building inside me. But all I could do was stand there, frozen in disbelief, watching as the people I loved most betrayed me in the worst possible way. "Thanks, Rob," I muttered, the words feeling hollow as they left my mouth. I couldn't even look at him. "I need some time alone." He nodded, his face filled with sympathy. "Of course, man. I'm sorry. If you need anything, I'm just next door." I didn't respond. Couldn't. As soon as he stepped out and the door clicked shut behind him, I collapsed into the nearest chair. My hand was shaking, the phone still in my hand. The video paused on a frame of Grace and Alice smiling, as if they hadn't just torn my world apart. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring as the rage inside me swelled. How could they do this? How could they betray me like this? Grace, the woman I had loved and trusted for over 30 years, and Alice, my daughter, my own flesh and blood. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Instead, I gripped the phone tighter, my body trembling with a mix of anger, shock, and disbelief. This couldn't be real, but the video had shown me otherwise. I sat there, staring at the floor, trying to process the weight of what I had just seen. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make sense of it. My family was gone. My life as I knew it was shattered. And all I had now was the cold, hard reality that the people I trusted most had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. I was no longer numb. I was angry. The hours after Rob's visit were a haze. My mind replayed the video on an endless loop. Grace and Alice's laughter seared into my memory like a twisted melody. Couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. All I could feel was the searing rage that burned through me. But I wasn't going to let that rage consume me recklessly. No, if they were going to betray me so thoroughly, I needed to respond in kind. I needed to hurt them in ways they couldn't imagine. They had no idea I knew, and that gave me the upper hand. For now, it was critical that I remain calm, hide the fury building inside. I needed time to plan, time to craft my revenge with precision, ensuring they felt every single ounce of betrayal they had inflicted on me. I locked myself in my home office, pacing back and forth. Every possible scenario raced through my head. Every way I could confront them, humiliate them, make them feel as powerless as I did. But none of the ideas felt right. This needed to be perfect. No screaming matches, no emotional outbursts. I would not let them see how shattered I was. I wanted to control. I wanted to deliver devastation in a way they'd never recover from. I sat down at my desk, booting up the computer, searching for information, anything I could use. My mind went cold, strategic. The pain was still there, a raw wound, but it was being eclipsed by something else now. The drive for calculated revenge. I started making calls, subtly reaching out to old contacts, people who owed me favors. I jotted down notes, details on financial assets, shared accounts, and legal loopholes. I wouldn't just hurt them emotionally. I was going to rip their lives apart from the foundation up. As I sifted through the documents, it became clear how intertwined everything was. Grace and I had built a life together, our assets, our house, the investments. It was all so tightly bound. But where she'd once thought we were partners, I now saw those connections as weapons, tools I could use to bring her down. I knew exactly where to strike first. I crafted a plan. First, Grace. I remembered all the little things. The shared savings, the property we owned in her name. There were ways I could bleed her dry financially, ensuring she lost everything. I started researching divorce law, seeking out lawyers with reputations for ruthless, scorched-earth tactics. I made calls, booked appointments. I wasn't interested in a fair split. I wanted to leave her with nothing. Next came Alice. This one was trickier. She was our daughter, and despite everything, it pained me to think of hurting her. But the betrayal I couldn't let go unpunished. I needed to teach her a lesson she wouldn't forget. She was young, still finding her footing in life. The stakes weren't financial with her. They were social. She craved approval, attention, the life of the party. What if all of that disappeared? What if the world she loved so much turned against her? I reached out to some of her friends, subtly planting seeds of doubt. A few well-placed comments about her behavior at the party. Rumors of her getting a little too close to certain people. It was only a matter of time before those whispers reached the right ears. Alice's reputation would crumble before her eyes. A little bit later, when Grace and Alice came home, I was ready. They walked through the door, laughing and chatting like nothing had happened. Grace set her purse on the counter, smiling at me as she walked over and kissed me on the cheek, just like she always did. The touch of her lips against my skin made my stomach churn, but I forced myself to smile. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked casually, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. "Fine, fine," I said, my voice calm and controlled. "Busy, but fine." Alice, too, was oblivious. She breezed into the room, her face glowing with excitement. "Dad, you should not have stayed. The party was amazing," she said, practically bouncing on her heels. "You would have had a blast." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat, managing a weak smile. "I'll make it next time," I replied, knowing full well that next time would never come. I listened to as they prattled on. Grace told me about some small talk she'd had with one of the neighbors. Alice chimed in about the drinks they'd had. My fist clenched under the table, but outwardly, I stayed composed. This was crucial. I couldn't let them see any cracks. I had to be the same husband and father they always knew, the one they thought would never notice, never catch on. Grace moved around the kitchen, starting on dinner, as Alice went on about the night. "Oh, and the club manager was so funny," she said, laughing as if the very mention of him wasn't like a knife twisting in my gut. "He had us all cracking up." I forced a chuckle, nodding as if I was just as amused. But inside, I was marking every word, every lie, every moment they acted as if nothing had happened. Fueled me, solidified my resolve. Over dinner, I played the part of the doting husband and father, asking them about their plans for the rest of the week, pretending to care about the mundane details of their lives. All the while, my mind was racing ahead. Tomorrow, I'd make the first moves, subtle, quiet steps to start unraveling everything they had. The financial pieces were already in motion. Soon enough, Grace would find her accounts drained, her security gone. Alice's reputation would begin to crumble as whispers spread among her friends. They'd think it was just bad luck at first, maybe a small misunderstanding, but eventually, they'd see the truth. The truth. I was the architect of their downfall. As the evening went on, I could feel my anger simmering just below the surface, but I knew better than to let it show. I kept smiling, laughing at their jokes, pretending to be the man they thought I was. But I wasn't that man anymore. As I watched them from across the table, their laughter filling the room, I silently vowed that they would never see it coming. By the time they realized what I was doing, it would be too late. They had torn my world apart, and now it was my turn to do the same. Tomorrow everything would change. The days that followed were calculated and methodical. My mind was sharp, focused solely on one thing, making sure they paid for what they had done. Each step needed to be precise, each action deliberate. I spent hours in my home office, reviewing the video, printing copies, and documenting everything. Every piece of evidence had to be airtight. The club manager wasn't going to be the only one enjoying a night with my wife and daughter. The courts, lawyers, and anyone else who would listen were going to get a front row seat as well. One morning, as Grace was busy with her morning routine, I quietly contacted a lawyer, someone who specialized in high-conflict divorce cases. I made it clear to him that I wanted nothing left to chance, no mercy, no compromise. We spoke for an hour, and by the end of that conversation, I had a clear path forward. He would draft the divorce papers and ensure every financial loophole favored me. Every asset that mattered, our house, the savings, the investments, would be positioned so Grace would be left with scraps. That evening, after the lawyer's call, I sat at the kitchen table with Grace. She was sipping wine, flipping through a magazine, seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. I let the conversation drift for a while, keeping things casual. When I felt the moment was right, I leaned forward, my voice soft but serious. "Grace, I've been thinking maybe we should go to marriage counseling," I said. She looked up from the magazine, her eyes surprised but not alarmed. "Counseling? Why are you feeling like something's wrong?" she asked, her tone light as if she didn't suspect a thing. I shrugged, playing my part perfectly. "I just think it would be good for us, keep the marriage strong. We've been through a lot, and I want to make sure we're in a good place." Grace smiled, nodding thoughtfully. "You're probably right. I'd be open to it. I mean, things are good, but it can't hurt, right?" I forced myself to smile back, though inside I was burning with the knowledge that the marriage was already over. She was sitting there casually, sipping her wine, agreeing to counseling, while I had divorce papers being prepared. It was almost laughable how clueless she was. "I'll find someone, maybe we can start next week?" I suggested, knowing full well that next week the papers would be filed, and counseling would be the least of her worries. Grace leaned over and kissed me on the cheek, oblivious to the impending disaster. "I think that sounds like a great idea," she said. I nodded, watching her as she turned back to her magazine, still completely unaware of what was coming her way. I excused myself from the table, heading to my office where I continued setting the trap with Alice. Things were different now. I knew that punishing her socially would hurt her more than anything. Alice thrived on her image, on being admired by her friends and peers. "You really think that's the best career choice?" I'd ask, watching her face tighten. At first, she didn't notice the shift, too wrapped up in her own self-importance. She brushed off my criticisms, rolling her eyes and laughing it away. But over time, the comments started to land. Her confidence faltered slightly, and I saw the doubt in her eyes when she talked about her decisions and choices. It was a slow burn, but I could see the cracks starting to form. She became defensive, trying to justify everything she did. But the more she talked, the less I listened. "Dad, it's my life, you don't understand how things work anymore," she snapped one evening after I questioned her again about her job. Her voice was tense, irritated. I leaned back in my chair, my tone measured. "I'm just saying, Alice, maybe you should think things through a little more. You can't coast on charm forever." She glared at me, but I could see the frustration building in her. It wasn't long before she started distancing herself, spending more time out with friends, avoiding conversations with me. That was exactly what I wanted. I needed her off balance, unsteady. I was planting seeds of doubt, knowing that soon enough they'd grow into full-blown cracks in her perfect little world. Behind the scenes, I worked diligently to isolate both Grace and Alice financially. I made arrangements to secure accounts, transfer assets, and take control of everything we shared. The investments I had so carefully built over the years, half of which were in Grace's name, were slowly slipping out of her grasp without her realizing it. By the time she'd figure out what was happening, it would be too late. One evening, Grace sat on the couch, her feet tucked under her, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up at me, a curious smile on her face. "You've been in your office a lot lately. Everything okay?" I nodded, my voice steady. "Just work, a lot going on." She didn't press further, her attention quickly drifting back to whatever nonsense she was reading on her phone. She had no idea that while she sat there comfortable and content, her entire life was about to implode. Over the next few days, I carefully moved forward with my plan. Each step was deliberate, each action a part of the larger picture. I wasn't in a rush. Revenge, I realized, was best served slowly, methodically, ensuring that every piece fell exactly where I wanted it to. The counselor I suggested was set up as another part of the facade. I scheduled an appointment and even went through with a session, playing the part of a husband who genuinely wanted to fix things. Grace was cooperative, of course. She thought this was just a little rough patch that we'd get through, like we always did. But I knew the truth. I had no intention of fixing anything, and Alice, for all her confidence, was starting to pull away. The tension between us grew, and I made sure she felt the pressure. She had no idea that the rumors I had planted among her social circle were starting to take root. People were beginning to question her integrity, her choices, her friendships were strained, and her flawless social image was beginning to show cracks. I watched all of this unfold with quiet satisfaction. They had no idea what was coming. No clue that the ground beneath their feet was about to give way. The setup was complete. Now all I had to do was wait for the right moment to pull the trigger. The moment had finally arrived. My heart pounded in my chest as I called Grace and Alice into the living room. The house was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. I had rehearsed this moment in my head countless times, but now that it was here, the tension was almost unbearable. Grace came down first, her face soft and expectant, likely thinking I had some mundane family matter to discuss. Alice followed a minute later, her eyes glued to her phone, completely unaware of the bomb that was about to drop. They both sat on the couch, sensing something serious but having no idea what was coming. "What's this about, honey?" Grace asked, her voice casually as she brushed a lock of hair behind her ear. Alice, still absorbed in her phone, glanced at me briefly but returned to her scrolling. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked over to the table and pulled out the folder, the one I had been meticulously preparing. I opened it and calmly spread the printed photos across the coffee table in front of them, and played the video. Grace's laughter, Alice's hand on the club manager's shoulder, the scene from the hot tub that had shattered my world. Grace's eyes flickered from one photo to the next, confusion giving way to panic. Her hand flew to her mouth as if she could physically hold back the truth from spilling out. Alice's face, usually so full of confidence and defiance, turned pale as she realized what she was looking at. The room was thick with the weight of their guilt. "I know about the club," I said, my voice cold and calculated. I felt detached, almost as if I were watching the scene unfold from a distance. Grace gasped and Alice froze. Their reactions were exactly what I expected, and it only fueled the anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. "What is this?" Grace stammered, finally breaking the silence. Her voice was shaky. She was reaching for something, anything, to make sense of the situation. I leaned in slightly, staring at her with a gaze that felt like ice. "You tell me?" I said, my voice low and dangerous as I gestured to the photos. "That's you, Grace, and that's you, Alice, in the hot tub with that piece of town club manager." The shock on their faces was palpable. Grace began to shake her head, her denial forming even before her words. Alice, her hands trembling, dropped her phone onto the couch, her eyes welling up with tears. "It's not what it looks like," Grace blurted, her voice desperate. "We were drunk. It was a stupid mistake. MAK. It didn't mean anything." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed through the room. "It didn't mean anything," I repeated, mocking her pathetic attempt at justification. "You destroyed our family for a cheap thrill, and you, Alice?" I turned toward her, my anger boiling over. "I raised you, I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me, by betraying me with him, with your own mother." Alice's tears spilled over her face, crumpling into sobs. "Dad, I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice breaking under the weight of her guilt. I wasn't thinking." "Not thinking," I barked, cutting her off. "That's your excuse? You weren't thinking while you climbed into that hot tub? You weren't thinking while you laughed and flirted with him, like I was nothing to either of you?" Grace reached out toward me, her hand trembling. Please, we can fix this, she said. This doesn't have to end us. It was a mistake, just a stupid mistake. I jerked away from her touch, disgusted. A mistake, I echoed. That's what you're calling this. What about the years we spent together, Grace? All the sacrifices, the trust, the loyalty? Was that just something to throw away for a night with some scumbag? Tears streamed down Grace's face now, and for a moment, she was speechless. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but nothing came out. The silence was deafening. I could feel the power shifting in the room. They had betrayed me, destroyed the foundation of our family, and now they were standing before me, utterly exposed, with no excuses that could mend what they had shattered. I was going to spend my life with you, I said, my voice cracking slightly as I looked at Grace. You were my partner, my best friend, and now you're just a stranger, someone I don't even recognize. Grace's face twisted with grief, and she collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. And you? I continued, turning to Alice, my voice harder now. You were my daughter, my little girl. How could you do this to me? To yourself? You've not only betrayed me, you've humiliated yourself. How could you let this happen? Alice's sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. They needed to understand the full weight of what they had done. You think I'm going to let you both get away with this? I continued, my voice steadying as I stood taller, gaining control. No, there are consequences for what you've done. You've ruined this family, and now you'll pay the price. Please, Grace whispered, her face buried in her hands. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. We'll do anything. Just please don't end it like this. I shook my head slowly. It's already over, Grace. You just don't realize it yet. I let those words hang in the air as I stood up and walked toward the door, leaving them in the wreckage of their own making. Neither of them followed me. Neither of them had the strength. Before I walked out, I turned back one last time. The divorce papers will be delivered by the end of the week. Don't bother trying to fight it. You've already lost. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in days, I felt something like peace. The day after the confrontation, I filed the divorce papers, sealing the fate of my marriage to Grace. I made sure everything was swift and cold. No second chances, no room for negotiation. That morning, I packed my things, threw Grace and Alice's belongings into bags, and set them by the front door. Grace and Alice tried talking to me, begging, pleading, but it was like listening to distant noise. Their words didn't penetrate the armor I'd built around myself. I'd already made my decision. Grace was sitting on the couch, her face pale and red-rimmed from the endless crying. She had been up all night trying to figure out what to say to fix this, but there was nothing left to say. Alice stood next to her, silent, as if the gravity of the situation had finally hit her. Please just talk to us. We can work this out, Grace said, her voice raw with emotion. We were stupid, we made a mistake, but we don't deserve to lose everything. I didn't even flinch. You lost everything the moment you stepped into that hot tub with him, I replied, my voice cold and steady. This isn't something you can apologize away. You both made your choices. Now you're going to live with the consequences. Alice finally spoke, her voice small and trembling. Dad, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I did it. Please don't do this. Don't throw us out. I'll do anything to make it right. I looked at her, the daughter I had raised, the child I had protected for almost 3 decades. It should have been hard to say what I needed to, but it wasn't. You betrayed me in the worst way possible, I said, locking eyes with her. You were supposed to be my daughter, Alice, my family, but you sided with her. I gestured toward Grace, who now had tears streaming down her cheeks. You both destroyed everything. You made your bed. Now lie in it. The words hit them like a sledgehammer, but I wasn't done. I want you both out of my house by the end of the day. You have a week to find somewhere to stay, but you're not living here anymore. Grace's sobs intensified, and Alice was shaking as she wrapped her arms around herself. But I felt no pity. They had made me feel like a fool, shattered everything I had built with them. Now was the time for them to feel the same. Please don't do this. We don't have anywhere to go, Grace begged, her voice breaking. She stood up and took a step toward me, as if she could close the distance that betrayal had forged between us. I shook my head. That's not my problem anymore. You should have thought about that before you humiliated me. And with that, I turned away. I didn't look back, not even when Grace's sobs echoed through the hallway or when Alice called out to me one last time. I walked out of the house, and the moment the door clicked shut behind me, I felt a strange sense of relief. The fallout didn't end there. As I left the house, I was only beginning to unravel everything that Grace, Alice, and the club manager had built on lies and deceit. The first thing I did was make sure that everyone in town knew exactly what had happened. I sent the video and images anonymously to key members of the community. The club manager, Rick, had always portrayed himself as the charming, respectable man around town, but I destroyed that image with a single email. Within days, the town was buzzing with rumors and whispers. The club fired Rick almost immediately, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. His reputation shattered. People stopped inviting him to events. Friends turned their backs, and his once pristine standing in the community crumbled to dust. No one wanted to be linked to a man who had affairs with both a married woman and her daughter. Rick tried to fight back, but it was useless. His credibility was destroyed, and there was no coming back from it. Every time he walked down the street, people whispered. Every glance, every awkward silence he encountered was a reminder of what he had done. Grace and Alice didn't fear much better. They were out of the house, staying with friends at first, but word spread quickly. People knew what they had done. They had become pariahs overnight. Grace tried to reach out to family and friends, hoping for support, but most of them sided with me. After all, what they had done was beyond forgiveness in most people's eyes. I heard that they struggled to find a place to live for a while. Grace lost her part-time job at the boutique when the owner found out about her scandalous behavior, and Alice couldn't even face the community anymore. People whispered behind her back, gossiped about how she had slept with her mother's lover. She became the subject of small-town ridicule, a punchline in hushed conversations. As for me, I moved on, slowly at first, but with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't going to let their betrayal define me. I surrounded myself with people who actually cared, friends, acquaintances who had my back. I hired a lawyer who ensured that the divorce left Grace with next to nothing. I kept the house, the savings, everything. Grace got the bare minimum. At first, I wondered if I got too far. But then I remembered that video. I remembered how they laughed, how they didn't care about the destruction they caused. And every time I thought about it, the guilt faded a little more. In the end, I found peace. I rebuilt my life one step at a time, free from the toxic lies that had once surrounded me. I started to enjoy life again, going out, meeting new people, and discovering that happiness was possible after betrayal. As for Grace and Alice, they had to pick up the pieces of the mess they created. They lived with the consequences of their actions each day, a reminder of the lives they had destroyed. And I lived the life I deserved, free, unburdened, and finally at peace.